Something historic happened on the blue courts of Indian Wells on March 8, 2026, and the tennis world was still catching its breath when the WTA live rankings updated and confirmed what the previous night's result had made possible. Eala had done it. She had broken into the top 30 of the WTA rankings for the first time in her career, reaching a new personal best of world number 28. For a 20-year-old from the Philippines, for a country that had never before produced a player at this level of professional tennis, for an entire community that had been watching and waiting and filling stadiums across 4 continents, the number was not just a career milestone, it was a historical moment that stretched far beyond the sport itself. If you want to follow this story as it continues to unfold, through the Grand Slams, through the clay season, through every milestone that comes next, subscribe to this channel now and hit the bell. We have been here from the beginning, and we will be here for every chapter that follows. Now let us talk about what reaching number 28 actually means, on the court, off it, and for everything that comes next. To understand the full weight of this achievement, you have to go back to where the story started. Just 12 months before reaching number 28, Eala was being written off by a significant portion of the tennis commentary world. The criticism was specific, and it was repeated often enough that it became a kind of accepted wisdom in certain tennis circles. She was a junior prodigy, the argument went, who had shown promise at the developmental level, but who lacked the physical tools to compete consistently against the best professional players in the world. She was too small. She did not have the power. The Pro Tour would eventually expose the gap between potential and reality, and the result would be a natural ceiling somewhere well outside the top 30. 12 months later, she was sitting at number 28 in the world, and the people who had made those arguments were doing what people always do when a clear prediction turns out to be completely wrong. They were moving on quickly and hoping nobody remembered what they had said. What actually happened in those 12 months was not a mystery or a surprise to anyone who had been watching closely. Eala had put in the work, consistently and without interruption, at the Rafa Nadal Academy in Mallorca. The training environment there is one of the most demanding in professional tennis. The academy was built by a man who won 22 Grand Slam titles through a combination of exceptional talent and a work ethic that became almost as famous as the results it produced. The standards inside that building reflect everything Nadal brought to his own career, and the players who train there are held to those standards every single day, regardless of their ranking or their age or the quality of their most recent result. Eala had been putting in thousands of hours on those courts, working on every part of her game, grinding through the sessions that nobody outside the academy ever sees. While the public was watching her in the stadiums, watching the crowds and the flags and the viral moments, she was doing the quiet, unglamorous work that ranking progress is actually built on. The leap to number 28 was the visible result of an enormous amount of invisible effort, and the people inside the academy who had watched it happen up close knew exactly what it had cost her to get there. The practical consequences of reaching number 28 are significant and immediate. Being inside the top 30 of the WTA rankings changes a player's relationship with the entire tour structure in concrete and meaningful ways. It means direct entry into every major Grand Slam without needing a wild card or going through qualifying rounds. It means seeded status at most major events, which determines where a player sits in the draw and which opponents they can potentially avoid until the later rounds. It means that the top seeds, the players ranked in the top 5 and top 10, cannot be drawn against Eala until the 3rd round at the earliest. For a player who has shown she can compete with and beat top 10 players when the matchup is right, that protection within the draw matters enormously. The financial implications run alongside the competitive ones. In professional tennis, rankings are not just a measure of performance, they are the foundation of a player's commercial value. Sponsorship contracts at the elite level are often structured around performance milestones and ranking thresholds. Breaking into the top 30 is one of those thresholds, one that triggers clauses and bonuses and renegotiation opportunities that simply do not exist for players sitting outside that tier. The jump from number 31 to number 28 looks like 3 spots on a list. In commercial terms, it is the difference between being a rising star with potential and being a confirmed global asset with a track record that brands can build campaigns around. Eala's existing relationship with Nike, which had already elevated her to global ambassador status and built an entire collection around the sampaguita, the national flower of the Philippines, was already operating at a level that reflected the brand's belief in her long-term value. The ranking confirmation added another layer of justification to that investment and opened conversations with other brands that had been watching and waiting for the right moment to move. Being number 28 in the world, with the commercial reach and the audience loyalty that Eala brings to that position, makes her more valuable to sponsors than several players ranked considerably higher, and the people who manage sports marketing budgets are not slow to recognize that kind of opportunity. Inside the Nadal Academy in Spain, the moment the ranking updated was a moment of genuine celebration. Staff and students who had watched Eala work for months, who had seen what she put into every training session, who understood, better than anyone on the outside, what the number 28 represented in terms of dedication and sacrifice, felt the result as something personal.
The Academy exists to develop players to the highest level of the sport. And when one of its students crosses a barrier that no player from her country has ever crossed before, it is a validation of everything the institution is built around. The celebration was real, and it was earned. But Eala herself, by multiple accounts, did not spend much time celebrating. Reports from the Indian Wells Media Center described a moment that captured her character more clearly than any trophy presentation could. She was seen walking toward the official WTA ranking screen inside the media center, watching as the digital display refreshed to show her name alongside the number 28. Witnesses described her standing in silence for around 10 seconds, not screaming, not throwing her arms in the air, not performing the kind of celebration that social media is designed to amplify. She simply looked at the screen, took in what she was seeing, and then quietly whispered something to herself. 3 words. Just the beginning, and then she walked away. That moment tells you everything important about the mindset that produced the ranking in the first place. Number 28 was not a destination she had been aiming for and could now rest at. It was a marker on a longer road, confirmation that the direction was right and the work was paying off, but not a reason to slow down. The players who get to the top of professional tennis and stay there are almost universally characterized by the inability to feel satisfied with a milestone once they have reached it. The milestone becomes the new baseline, and the focus immediately shifts to the next one. That is the mentality visible in the 10 seconds of silence in front of a ranking screen in Indian Wells, and it is the same mentality that produced the thousands of hours of training in Mallorca that made the ranking possible. The reaction from the rest of the tour was telling in its own way. Professional tennis players are competitive people who spend their careers measuring themselves against each other in very precise and public ways. When a player who had been described as having a natural ceiling suddenly breaks through into territory that the commentary had insisted was beyond her, the response in the locker room is not always comfortable. Some players began requesting more detailed scouting reports on Eala's game. Coaches who had previously filed her away as a useful practice partner or a manageable early-round opponent were now looking at match footage with a different set of questions in mind. The player who had been regarded as a crowd phenomenon with an entertaining game was now a seeded competitor who could potentially appear in the quarterfinals of a Grand Slam, and that changed the calculation for everyone sitting above her in the draw. One of the most emotionally significant parts of the number 28 story happened not in a press conference or a social media post, but in a private message. Nadal, who had mentored Eala at his academy and who had described her publicly with a warmth that went well beyond the formal relationship between an institution and its students, sent her a video message when the ranking was confirmed. The content of that message, as described by people close to the situation, was characteristic of the man who sent it. He did not simply congratulate her, he reminded her that reaching number 28 was not the end of a journey, but the opening of a door, and he told her directly and with genuine pride that her job now was to walk through it and take everything that was waiting on the other side. That message, from a 22-time Grand Slam champion to a 20-year-old who had just made history for her country, carries a weight that no commercial endorsement or sponsor statement can replicate. Nadal does not extend that kind of personal investment casually. He has described Eala in terms that suggest he sees her not just as a talented student, but as someone carrying the potential to change what is possible for players from regions that professional tennis has historically underestimated. When he tells her to walk through the door and take everything, he is speaking from the experience of someone who spent his career doing exactly that, and the belief embedded in those words matters in a way that is difficult to quantify but impossible to dismiss. In the Philippines, the reaction to the number 28 ranking was immediate and deeply felt. Tennis in the Philippines has a committed following, but has never before had a player competing at the highest tier of the professional game to rally around. The Pacquiao era gave the country a global boxing champion whose success generated a particular kind of national pride, the pride of seeing someone from your community compete with and beat the best in the world on the world's biggest stage. Eala's rise to number 28 in tennis is beginning to generate something similar, a sense that the country has a genuine representative at the top of a global sport, not just participating, but competing seriously and succeeding. Tennis clubs across the Philippines reported surges in enrollment inquiries in the days following the ranking announcement. Young children who had been watching Eala's matches wanted to start playing. Parents who had never thought of tennis as an accessible or realistic path for their children were suddenly asking questions about how to get started. That is the long-term impact of a visible role model operating at the highest level of a sport, and it extends far beyond anything that can be measured in ranking points or prize money figures. Eala at number 28 is a signal to every child in the Philippines that the ceiling is not where the conventional wisdom said it was. The destination is the top, and someone from their country is already on the way there.
The commercial story around the ranking announcement was equally significant. Reports indicated that a commemorative shirt marking the number 28 achievement generated tens of thousands of pre-orders within hours of the ranking being confirmed. This followed the pattern established by the Sampaguita collection, which had sold out in under 60 seconds when it dropped earlier in the year. The appetite of the Filipino community and the broader tennis following that Eala has built for merchandise tied to her story is not the normal commercial response to a player at her ranking level. It is the commercial response you'd typically see around players who have been at the top of the sport for years and who have accumulated the kind of cultural weight that takes a long time to build. Eala has built it in a fraction of the time through the authenticity of her story and the genuine passion of the community that has adopted her as their own. The broader tennis industry is still in the process of understanding what Eala's rise means for the sport's commercial future. For decades, the economic model of professional tennis has been built around audiences in Europe, North America, and Australia. The major broadcasters, the biggest sponsors, the tournament scheduling decisions, all of it has reflected a sport that understood its core market as Western and that treated Asian audiences as secondary. Eala is changing that equation in real time. She is generating broadcast interest, merchandise demand, and social media engagement that rivals what top 5 players produce, and she is doing it from a ranking of 28, with a fan base centered in Southeast Asia and the Filipino diaspora spread across the world. The broadcasters have noticed. There were reports in the aftermath of the Indian Wells ranking confirmation that television networks in Asia were making direct requests to the WTA about scheduling, wanting Eala's matches in prime time slots accessible to Asian audiences rather than in the early rounds played at times that suit European or American viewers. That kind of pressure from broadcasters reflects real commercial power. The kind of power that changes how tournaments are built and how the sport is presented globally. Eala is not just a player ranking up, she is a market force that the professional tennis infrastructure is going to have to accommodate. Her father's response to the critics who had spent years dismissing her potential was brief and perfectly calibrated. A 5-word question posted publicly to the people who had said she was too small, too limited, too far from the physical requirements of elite professional tennis to ever make the top 30. Do you see us now? Not an exclamation, a question, addressed not just to the critics, but to everyone who had looked at a young Filipino woman and decided, without sufficient evidence, where her ceiling was. The answer was visible in real time on a ranking screen in Indian Wells, and it required no further elaboration. Number 28 is a milestone. It is a historic one for the Philippines, a meaningful one for professional tennis, and a personal one for a young woman who has been working toward it in the early mornings and late afternoons of a training academy in Spain, while the world gradually worked out what she was becoming. But it is not the destination. She said so herself in 10 seconds of silence in front of a screen, in 3 words that nobody else was meant to hear. The door is open. The work continues, and the people who thought they knew where her ceiling was are going to need to keep revising their estimates. We have been here for every step of this journey, and we will be here for everything that comes next. If you want to follow this story as it moves through the clay season and into the Grand Slams, subscribe to this channel and hit the bell. The Queen is just getting started, and so are we.